Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show, the show where we discuss what I'm going to do on somebody else's show, which is part of what we're going to talk about today with Duane Generalissimo Patterson, Master of the Universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com. And yes, we are going to talk about my guest hosting tomorrow on tomorrow's Hugh Hewitt show, as well as lots of other things. Duane, welcome back.
Always great to be here. And, as the world gets crazier and crazier, as politicians get bonkers to an even more absurd level, I can think of no one I would much rather analyze and mock and just basically revel in the stupidity with than Ed Morrissey.
Well, yeah, we're going to get a chance to do this tonight.
Tonight on the after show, yes, yeah. Indeed, as well as on the Hugh Hewitt show tomorrow. And we'll talk about all the guests we've got lined up for tomorrow later on in this podcast. That will be a short conversation, at least so far. But hey, Kurt Schlichter came in today and yesterday, and I've got like world-class video clips, right? I mean, I've got if you're looking for the Olympics of stupid, I mean, I've got all sorts of contenders. Podium contenders day after day this week. And Kurt had 9 guests out of the 12 segments today. He had 8 guests out of the 12 segments yesterday. God bless him. A fine collection of guests. My prep was not heard by the masses. So tomorrow it will be.
Tomorrow will be all about Duane's show prep. It's going to be great.
Naturally, everybody's going to go mute tonight, and all of DC is going to call a lid, with just my luck. But no, if tomorrow is anything like today, we're going to have no shortage of dumb things said.
Well, there you go. There's no shortage of dumb things said today. We're coming into this. We just got the Consumer Price Index report, highest consumer price index. But before we, in 40 years, but before we even get to that, we got to talk about Kamala Harris in Poland. And I think in Poland, they're going to be telling Kamala Harris jokes. When I grew up, the Polish jokes were the thing. Now I think they're going to be telling Kamala Harris jokes in Poland.
So I started the morning. It was about 4 a.m. my time when I looked up. And I saw on my TV screen, I've always got the sound down. I've got this, the closed caption going so I can read what's going on. I've got too much noise in here anyway. So I normally don't have the sound up unless I really need to. I look up and I see a joint presser in Warsaw with Kamala Harris and Polish President Duda. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, no, this can't be good. And I really didn't even want to turn up the sound. I put up a tweet saying, my guess is Kamala Harris is probably discussing the inner nuances of kielbasa versus other sausages and how much we need to support our NATO meat partners. That to me is that's the level of discourse I expect from Kamala Harris. So it was going on and on and on. And I finally went, okay, crap, I got to at least take a peek. I literally turn up the volume as I hear Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, representing not just the United States, but the lead dog in NATO, with a very strategic NATO partner in Poland, where there's some controversy about whether or not we're going to play a shell game with some jets to be able to get some air firepower to the Ukrainians, wink, wink, nod, nod. I'm thinking, okay, this could be important. It's not. Here's what Kamala Harris actually said.
I am here, standing here on the northern flank, on the eastern flank, talking about what we have in terms of the eastern flank and our NATO allies, and what is at stake at this very moment.
Okay, let's. This is
the northern flank.
This is the first half of the cut, just the first half of the cut, because the second half we need to dissect as well for different reasons. But the first half of the cut, this is prepared.
These are prepared remarks, right?
This is her prepared remarks. There's no prompter. This is Kamala Harris on the plane on the way over being briefed by staff. She had the briefing book. Okay, Madam Vice President, you're going to Poland. Now, Poland is a big country in Europe. Right? I mean, we have read how many stories, Ed, you and me, how many stories have we read in places like Politico, Washington Post, New York Times, mainstream media sources?
Yeah, these are saying, constant.
Who are saying that the problem with Kamala Harris is she refuses to take briefings. It's not that she's just an ignorant moron. It's that she has shown no desire to correct her shortcomings on her knowledge set. She's not interested in learning anything about this stuff, right?
Right.
She doesn't want to get briefed. So she's on the plane on the way over, as God only knows what's going to happen in this war in Ukraine. And she's on the stage with the president of Poland, President Duda, and she says, I'm standing here, right here. Well, where else would she be standing than right here? I'm sitting right here. You're sitting right there.
Right here. There. I'm right here. I'm right here.
Where else would you be? I mean, rhetorically.
I'm in Texas. Where else? I'm in Texas. Where else would I want to be?
Right. It's rhetorically stupid. Yeah. So she says, I'm here. I'm standing here, right here on the northern flank. And she catches herself. No, that's probably not right. Where am I at? I'm on the eastern flank of NATO. Yep, that's where I am. I'm not on the northern flank. I'm on the eastern flank. Well, let's just kind of picture, if you will, the map of Europe, would you? You've got Poland, and do you know who their neighbor is to the north and the east?
The Baltic states are to the north and slightly to the east of Poland.
Just to the north and the east. If you were to take a clock face and you put the center of the clock face in Warsaw, you go to about 2 o'clock. And 2 o'clock, which is northeast, you go zipping right into Lithuania.
Right.
So Lithuania, which is a NATO state, is northier and eastier of Poland.
Well, Norway is northier at least, and Norway is a NATO member.
Well, correct. I understand. Right. I mean,
there's a lot of north above Poland.
There's a hell of a lot. Right. You could make the case that Norway is saying, northern flank? Really?
What was that?
Come again? I'm looking due south at how stupid you are, and you're saying that you're standing in the northern flank. I'm north of you, and I'm looking at your back.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So that's the northern flank. But then she says, I'm coming from the eastern flank. Well, Lithuania is still north and east of Poland. And then you have that same clock face. You've got that same geometric arc, and you keep going northeast, and now you're into Latvia. Latvia is to the north and to the east of Lithuania, which is to the north and the east of Poland. And then you keep cruising right through Latvia, and you know what you're going to hit next? Estonia.
Yeah.
That's another NATO country, and they're not the northeast, because we've already established Norway is, but they're certainly the eastiest of the NATO countries.
They're pretty easty. Yeah.
And you know why they're the eastiest? Because both Latvia and Estonia, guess who their border is on their eastiest side?
Belarus.
No. Estonia and Latvia.
Oh,
guess what?
Russia.
Guess who they touch?
Russia. Yeah.
So by definition, if you're talking NATO countries, by definition, if you touch Russia, that's about as eastern flank as you can get.
That's easty. That's pretty darn easty.
That's as easty as you can get. And that's a far sight eastier than where Kamala Harris's ass is in Poland.
Yeah.
Not that I'm minimizing Poland at all. God love the kielbasa, but they're not the eastern flank. They're not the northern flank. they're Poland. Okay.
All right.
So
I think we've beaten that one pretty much to death. Let's move on.
That's the first half of the clip.
That's the first half of the first clip.
Here's the rest of the clip.
What is at stake this very moment are some of the guiding principles around the NATO alliance, and in particular, the issue and the importance of defending sovereignty and territorial integrity, in this case of Ukraine.
Ed Morrissey, just a quick question. In the guiding principles of NATO, where exactly is that clause of the guiding principles of NATO to protect the territorial sovereignty of a non-NATO state?
It doesn't exist.
Which clause is that?
I think she's actually talking about the United Nations Charter here. I think she's confused.
So she's conflating NATO with the UN.
Yes. I'm pretty sure that. I mean, it's tough. It's difficult to know what's going on inside Kamala Harris's head.
Does she think
the echoes are just brutal there, Duane? So it's hard to know exactly what's going on in her head. But I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Does she think that Brussels is the eastern flank of NATO, or does she want sprouts in her salad for lunch?
I think sprouts. I think she's looking for sprouts, man. Look, I don't know if that was the case, we'd already be at war with Russia, right? I mean, if that was the case, we wouldn't be excuse the phrase, dicking around with whether to transfer a few dozen MiGs from Poland to Ukrainian pilots. We'd already be in there with much heavier weaponry. And the reason why we're not is because Ukraine isn't part of NATO. And for good reason. There's a good reason Ukraine's not part of NATO, because if
they haven't agreed to it and they haven't ponied up 2%.
We haven't agreed to it.
Nobody has.
Nobody has. Nobody has. Let's just say Ukraine's not part. Let's not get into the big, long, convoluted thing about this.
Right, but has Ukraine filled out the application and said, "Here's our 2% check"? No, they haven't done that yet.
Well, it's because they haven't been invited to do it.
Right.
NATO really doesn't want, especially now, doesn't want Ukraine inside NATO, because they don't want to have to do an Article 5 intervention when Russia invades Ukraine, which is exactly what happened here.
Without having the resources and the money to go along with it.
Right, exactly.
But you know who they're sure entertaining the idea of now? Finland.
Yeah, Finland
and Sweden's going to be right behind them too.
Yep. Finland's going to be first. Finland's got a big whiff of what's going on in Ukraine and doesn't want any part of that nonsense. And now Finland wants to join NATO. Now, they haven't been in NATO. They've refused NATO membership for 80 years, right?
But the polling sure has changed in Finland on that subject in the last couple of weeks.
Yes, now they understand that Russia is not just a normal country, but is actually an active threat against them. Yes. They understand that probably better than most do anyway. But yeah, I think what really is happening in Finland is that they've realized that joining NATO isn't really going to be a provocation that matters anymore. Putin is just wanting to get the Soviet band back together, and they're looking, and just like the Soviets, they'd want to run over Finland to do it. And
sure.
And so yeah, that's the home of the Molotov cocktail. I think has finally decided that. All things being equal, they'd rather be part of NATO than not. All right.
Don't blame them.
Now we have more. I think we have more from Kamala Harris. Do you have the clip in which she was asked a question and burst out laughing?
I can probably play that if I play it off of Grabian. Let me.
You can probably get that one if you look at Tom Elliott, who's of course runs Grabian. If you look at his Twitter feed, you might be able to find it there. I'd play it, but then you wouldn't be able to see it. So
no, I can probably do it. Let me go here and here, and
I mean, this is bizarre. While you're looking for this, I'm just going to set this up. Now, it is not unusual. In fact, it's the normal thing to do joint press conferences with a head of state, if you're vice president or president. And then you usually hold pressers, although sometimes that doesn't take place. It hasn't happened with Biden as often as it used to. But when a reporter asks a question of either head of state, there's really no protocol there. The person who's asked the question is supposed to answer it.
Right.
Now, I set that up as context, because what you're going to see here is Kamala Harris being asked about a refugee crisis that's about 2 weeks away from collapsing.
Right.
And there's nothing really funny about this topic, Duane, and yet here is our Veep reacting to this.
I'd like to ask you about some reporting that my colleague here in Poland noticed. He recently spoke with the mayor of the largest border town, who told him that the refugee system is essentially not set up for this, that it will collapse. It's an improvised system that can work for maybe 2 weeks, but not indefinitely. And I'm wondering what the United States is going to do more specifically to set up a permanent infrastructure. And relatedly, is the United States willing to make a specific allocation for Ukrainian refugees? And for President Duda, I wanted to know if you think, and if you asked the United States to specifically accept more refugees.
Okay. A friend in need is a friend indeed.
Okay, I can first. Okay, so this time.
What the hell was that? I mean, she can't even answer the question.
She can't answer the question.
A friend in need is a friend indeed? I mean...
She doesn't know protocol. I mean, typically, when you go on a trip like this, you not only are briefed on the politics and the policy of the situation, but you are briefed on the protocol of the situation.
Yeah.
She can't be bothered with any of it. She only cares. There's only one thing in the world she cares, and that's the next rung up on the ladder that she can climb to. That's all she cares about. Nothing else. That's all minutia to her. I don't want to deal with this. I just need whatever platform is going to possibly get me to the next level on the ladder.
You know, I don't know if you're going to remember this movie, Duane, because I think you were a little too young to recall it when it first came out. But there was a terrible movie called National Lampoon's Movie Madness.
I never saw it. I remember the movie coming out. I never saw it.
Okay. One of the segments, it's one of these, it's like skits. This was a Zucker thing, right? This was a Zucker, Abrams Zucker thing,
right,
that came out. And one of the segments of this thing was about this woman who basically sleeps her way to the top of the margarine industry in like 5 days. I mean, the concept is funny. The execution was not great, but the concept was funny. And I was watching this the other day because I have this proclivity to watch really bad movies over and over again. I don't know why. I just love bad movies. And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, this is Kamala Harris. This is Kamala Harris.
One heartbeat away.
One heartbeat away from running the entire margarine industry.
One heartbeat away, which brings me to 2 heartbeats away from the presidency.
Are we going to get into the whole faceplant that House Democrats executed yesterday on the
we can. We certainly can. But it was during that press conference after the faceplant where Nancy Pelosi showed at 78 why, maybe showing up drunk to work is not what you want to do. Because she had a press conference where people were looking at each other going, is she all right? She looks like she may have been, nipping at the bottle a little bit.
After yesterday, I'm not sure that she might have an excuse after yesterday.
She might have an excuse after yesterday. That is entirely true. She had a comment yesterday that was rather remarkable. Let me see if I can get this up on the old screen. Here she is. Is that the right one? That doesn't look like the right one. Let me close this out.
Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to just explain what the faceplant was, which was that
Oh yeah, by all means.
For some reason, Joe Biden wants an extra, I don't know, $20 billion in COVID management funds, even though we don't have an accounting for the hundreds of billions of dollars that we just allocated a year ago for COVID management. And on top of which, we're doing this year's budget 6 months late. And you would expect that to just be as a request that's in the budget, because we're now in year 3 of this pandemic, and HHS probably should start budgeting for normal management of what is going to be clearly an endemic virus. So they've been negotiating this at the leadership level. They don't have, because of the omnibus process, they're not involving the committees, and the Republicans insisted on offsetting the spending costs for the extra whatever it was going to be. It ended up being something around $16.5 billion. And so they were going to take it out of the state and local aid package that passed a year ago. And Nancy Pelosi agreed to this. And Republicans said they weren't going to spend new money on this because we've already spent enough new money. If they want to reallocate some of the existing money that hasn't been spent, then they're willing to go along with that. And Nancy Pelosi thought she had a deal. They announced the deal. They announced the votes. We're coming to a pretty hard deadline on this, because the existing CR runs out over the weekend.
Right.
And so they need to start taking votes on this package to get it passed so they don't run into a government shutdown. And her progressive members threw a fit yesterday when they found out that when they read the bill before it was passed, when they found out what was in the bill before they passed it, they threw a fit about the offsets. And rather than trying to work it out, they actually had to pull all of the extra COVID funding out of the omnibus bill. Now they're going to try to float it as a standalone,
which is a train wreck. And that's coming off of this last weekend. The House Ways and Means Committee tried to put through we're getting off of Russian oil. That was a bipartisan bill that would have passed both houses. And Joe Biden personally called Ways and Means, and then personally called Nancy Pelosi to say, you can't do this to me. You're going to cut my legs out from under me. And they both told him to go blank himself, because you're politically killing us. We can't sit here and support buying Russian oil. It's politically untenable.
Right.
So it led to Joe Biden on Tuesday saying, well, we're getting off of Russian oil. Well, great, dipshit. Everybody else did first.
Right. Exactly.
So, I mean, that's 2 really bad episodes for Nancy Pelosi's house in 4 days, right?
Right.
So naturally, here is Nancy Pelosi recovering, offering up her foreign policy chops.
In fact, when I spoke to President Zelensky, I said, Billie Jean King sends you her regards and wants to know how she can help in an event.
Billie Jean King.
Billie Jean King.
So she served that one up, huh?
Yeah, because apparently Zelensky needs a little work on his backhand.
Yeah. I would call that one a foot fault by
Billie Jean King.
Billie, no knocking Billie Jean King here, but I mean that.
Imagine you're Zelensky, and you're on the other end of that phone call, and your English is so. It's not great. It's okay. It's kind of conversational, but you don't know every cultural reference. You're Zelensky, and you've got a couple people around you that are like translators to help you out. And Nancy Pelosi pulls that one on you. Hey, I got Billie Jean King here, and she sends her regards, and she wants to help any way she can. And you're Zelensky, and you're going, what's a fuzzer? and you got a guy typing on his keyboard madly. 78? Lesbian? Tennis player? I mean,
Billie Jean King, though.
Billie Jean King.
She beat Bobby Riggs. She beat Bobby Riggs. She can beat the Russians. I don't know.
It's madness, Ed. It's just, we are led at all levels by Democrats right now. At everywhere you look, they are fall down stupid. They are as dumb as this desk.
Yes.
And we are actually entertaining the idea that we are a whisker away from nuclear war. Now, I don't think we're going to get there. God knows I don't want to get there, but we are closer to a nuclear war than we have been since you and I were little kids, right?
Well, since the Cuban Missile Crisis, actually, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Since we were, it was before I was born, and since you were a little kid, right?
It was slightly slightly before I was born.
Okay, so you're what? You're 4 years older than I am?
I'm 59.
Okay, you're 4 years older than I am. So it was right before you were born. It was like 5-6 years before I was born. We have not been this close. And when I mean this close, I mean of all the players that are involved in this theater that's going on right now, all it takes is one mistake.
Yeah.
One bomb going the wrong side of a border. It takes one mistake, and it's game on, right? It's
right.
One mistake. And what's the chance? Low odds, I would say, but it's a non-zero chance of some idiot, because if you think Russia has full command and control of all their resources and troop deployments, they don't. So what happens if one Russian group launches a raid somewhere thinking they're somewhere and they're not, and they hit something that they shouldn't have hit, and it belongs to a NATO partner? It's
right.
Game on.
It's game on. So that prompts the question, Duane, as to why we're making Russia our partner in talks with Iran over their nuclear weapons development. And
because we are as thoroughly unserious about foreign policy as we have ever been.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is at least James Buchanan probably had some redeeming qualities. If you really dig deep down,
it would take a lot of digging.
It would take a lot of digging, but again, I mean, we talked to Dr. Michael Oren from Israel today, and they're like, I don't even know where to start of how bad of an idea this is. There is nothing good that comes out of the Iran deal. Well, zip, nothing.
And you had Jen Psaki last night, right? Because Russia accused Ukraine of holding, of conducting chemical and biological weapons exploration, I guess you could call it, research for the United States. So we had several facilities in there, and that's one of the reasons why Russia's going in there. And Jen Psaki says on Twitter, has this whole long string about we took note of Russia's false claims about alleged U.S. biological weapons labs and chemical weapons development in Ukraine. This is preposterous. It's the kind of disinformation operation we've seen repeatedly from the Russians over the years in Ukraine and in other countries, which have been debunked. An example of the types of false pretexts we've been warning that the Russians would invent. Okay, so why do you have Mikhail Ulyanov negotiating the U.S. position in Iran? I mean, this is the most idiotic decision that I think I've seen in foreign policy, is outsourcing American security to Russia, of all places, in conjunction with China to contain Iran on a rogue weapons program, when Jen Psaki, in this long string last night, talks about how they violate the chemical and biological weapons conventions and how they have operating programs in contravention of international law. And if that's the case, why would you have Russia at the table in this thing?
You wouldn't. And here's another thing that would make this a non-starter in any sane world. Margaret Brennan of CBS News reported this 2 nights ago in a print story, not for Face the Nation, but a print story. Margaret Brennan's a serious reporter. She hosts Face the Nation. The State Department is fully aware of a current threat assessment that has elevated of Iran embedding hit squads in the United States with the intent of finally avenging Soleimani by taking out former senior officials like Mike Pompeo and Brian Hook at State and some others that are on their hit list, John Bolton among others. So Iran is actively trying to embed hit squads in the U.S. State knows about it is fully aware of it. And according to Margaret Brennan's reporting, state is willing to look the other way and ignore that, and because they don't want that to interfere with the prospects of the deal.
Yep.
It should be a non-starter.
Absolute non-starter. Absolute non-starter. Should absolutely be non-starter.
It's as if, according to Margaret Brennan's reporting, it's as if the White House thinks that if they whack a former Trump official, it's an acceptable loss if they can get the deal.
Right. Yeah. It's exactly what it is. It's not even like. That's exactly what it is. That's precisely the calculation. Speaking of calculations, Duane, we're out of time. So we got to talk about what's coming up on tomorrow's Hugh Hewitt show.
Well, you tell me. You're hosting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm hosting. So I'm coming up on tomorrow's Hugh Hewitt show at 6 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 a.m. in God's time zone, 3 a.m. on the left coast. We don't have any guests set up yet, but we'll probably have a couple of guests.
We probably will, but there really is no other story than what's going on with the evolution of this war.
Oh,
right?
There's other stories. There's inflation.
There's
This
inflation.
omnibus bill. There's this, the polling after the State of the Union address. We got tons of stuff to talk about.
I think if we had no guests at all, we've got plenty to talk about.
Well, then you're going to see Ed Morrissey monologuing, or maybe dialoguing, because we're going to get Duane involved in this for 2 hours tomorrow. And of course, you got the Hillsdale hour,
right? Larry Arner will be on in hour 3.
Tarzana Joe comes on tomorrow, by the way.
He will make an appearance as always.
As always. So yeah, Sonny Bunch won't be there. He can't make it this time, but so this is going to be a lot of fun, and looking forward to that. And tonight on the Universe.
Tonight on the Universe, I will have a special guest. Ed Morrissey will come on.
Wow.
Normally he's on Wednesdays, but he was going to be on Thursday night tonight instead. Why? Because I had to umpire a Little League game last night. And so I had to shift him over to Thursday night, and thankfully he was available. And my guess is when I wake up from my nap here, my guess is there'll be some stuff going on in the news that we can talk about.
Wow, that bald SOB really gets around.
Well, as I always say, between the two of us, we make a perfect ass out of ourselves.
We do, absolutely. Just do the head tilt there. All right, Duane Generalissimo Patterson, Master of the Universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com. I'll see you tonight, sir.
In a few hours. Thanks as always.
All right, folks, stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining me right now is Dr. Joel Zinberg, Senior Fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and Director of Public Health and Wellness at the Paragon Health Institute, to talk about the necessity, or lack thereof, of additional COVID funding. And Dr. Zinberg, great to have you with us for the first time on the Ed Morrissey Show podcast.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure to be here.
So we've spent an awful lot of money on the pandemic. And of course, some of that has been absolutely necessary. Some of it really hasn't been so much in the pandemic as to mitigate some of the secondary and tertiary impacts of it, the economic impacts of it. But there's been a ton of money spent directly on funding things like Operation Warp Speed, which produced, at least 3, maybe now 4 or 5 vaccines for COVID-19. The distribution methods for states and localities to get those vaccines out, and some of the therapeutics have been developed through some of that. But I mean, I think that if we're talking about the direct spending on medical issues in the pandemic, we're talking probably at least $1 trillion over the last 2 years. And now the Biden administration is saying that they're out of money for those efforts, and they're coming back to Congress for more. And I know that you wrote about this in the New York Post last week. Tell us all the different reasons why this is misguided.
Well, look, I think, basically much of this additional spending is unnecessary. It's wasteful. It may lead to more inflation. And on a very fundamental level, we've never had a good accounting of where all the previous money went. If you look at, what the government has done over the last few years, there have been three major tranches of spending. One was back in the spring of 2020, and then there was another big bill in the December of 2020,
Right.
in the waning days of the Trump administration. And then there was the March of 2021, another bill by the Biden administration passed with solely Democratic support, not a single Republican. And all told, you're up about $5 trillion, with trillions, not billions. And there's never been a good accounting of where that money went. And there are various reports indicating that as much as $500 billion of the federal money has never been obligated. There are a number of reports that billions of dollars that were sent to the states and that they've received has never been spent. In fact, it looks like only a fraction of the money that the states and local governments received has ever been spent. And some of it not even on stuff that, charitably speaking, one would say is related to combating COVID. So it would be a nice idea if we had an accounting of where all this money went before we decide to spend billions more.
Well, I think that absolutely. And I mean, the number that they're putting out right now, I think, is $22.5 billion, which doesn't sound like a lot when you compare it to what has preceded it. But if we've got $500 billion, I mean, that's more than 20 times that amount that's still sitting around that hasn't been allocated. And that we know of anyway. And again, it's because there hasn't been a lot of accounting for this. We do know that some of the other programs, Dr. Zinberg, once there was some accounting done on some of the other programs, like the Paycheck Protection Program, which I think was a good idea at the time, that there's been quite a bit of fraud and misallocation and all sorts of different problems that's run into lots of billions of dollars. And I think that's the reason why before we spend more money, we need to make sure that we've accounted for the money that's out there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's an important first step. Then you really have to question, why are we spending all this additional money now? You're in a situation where cases, hospitalizations, deaths have declined precipitously, down by 80-90% from their peak in mid-January. You're really approaching levels that are among the lowest seen in the entire pandemic. We're at a point where between vaccine immunity and natural immunity that one gets from recovery from a previous case of COVID, most of the population has immunity. Right. So again, why are we moving here? They're talking about new spending, billions for outreach programs and education programs to tell people about the vaccine. There's been a pretty constant drumbeat over the last year to get the vaccines. I don't think it's a problem that we haven't spent enough time or money on trying to convince people to get the vaccines. I would urge everyone to get the vaccine, but I don't think additional money spent on education is going to convince people who at this stage of the game are not vaccinated. So again, you have to wonder about that. Then they're talking about tax credits for businesses so that they can provide family leave and sick leave.
Right.
Again, you're at a point in the pandemic where, number one, there's all this immunity. Number two, cases are going way down. Number three, you're in a point where the predominant strain is Omicron, which is noticeably milder than the other earlier strains. So you shouldn't have very many people who need to stay home to take care of a loved one. So why are we spending money on that? And it seems like an invitation to pay people not to work. So again, I sort of have to wonder, why at this point are we doing this? And some of the, I can get into, but some of the plans are really sort of make very little sense and seem more like they're for publicity purposes to show that something's being done rather than showing that they're actually necessary or that they're well thought out.
Right. Well, that's been the hallmark of a lot of this response to COVID-19. And we can certainly get into that. You mentioned something about, some of these special interests. Our colleague over at redstate.com was writing about this earlier today as we're recording this, talking about part of the COVID relief funding. I think it was the third tranche, went to a group called Save Our Stages. As part of the bailout from this pandemic. And I'm sure that listeners will recall, and I know that Dr. Zinberg, you know this, is that a lot of this stuff was done to, give subsidies to arts and entertainment in order to keep them afloat while there were pandemic restrictions on public gatherings. But he points out in this is that, the prominent beneficiary of Save Our Stages was Dana Frank, who's a big deal in my former community of Minneapolis, St. Paul. She's a friend of Amy Klobuchar, Senator Amy Klobuchar's. She ended up with about $10 million of that money, and to sort of benefit the Save Our Stages thing. So I mean, a lot of that money is going to well-connected people, and you can maybe on paper say, well, look, I mean, you can make an argument that, well, we've closed these venues, we've got to try to keep the people who are in them afloat, but that money seems to find its way to people who are fairly well politically connected, to the people who are actually disseminating this cash. And this is part of the reason why, first off, you shouldn't have a whole lot of government interventions that require more government interventions to fix, but in pandemics sometimes you have to break a few things, but at some point you have to stop doing that, right? And you have to dial down all of those issues, because it really does lead to endemic corruption if left unchecked.
Right. Look, there was no question that early on in the pandemic, and we're talking about spring of 2020, when business and commerce, everything was grinding to a halt. Restaurants were closed, all the theaters were closed, businesses couldn't open. You needed relief, and that was provided. And thankfully, things are finally opening up again. Even in New York City, where I am from, they have finally lifted all the various and sundry mandates, including mask mandates for kids in school. So you're now at a point where maybe these businesses can really start to get up off their backs and have their workers earn a living again. But if that money was, I don't know about this Save Our Stages situation, but if the money was diverted to a small cadre of people and not passed down to the people who really need it, the people who worked in the theaters, I mean, whether it was as an actor, actress, or just someone who took the tickets, or was an usher, if the money was not passed down to them, that's a real crime. I mean, those folks ought to be held to account. And that's why I think you need this accounting that we spoke about right at the outset.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, I would say go over to redstate.com, because Joe's got more information on that. I'm not necessarily sure that the money didn't eventually flow down to some people who needed it, but it became pretty clear, though, I think, that process was becoming politicized, and it was going to the people who were, the need was probably those who were more in the clique. Or at least that's the risk, right? I mean, that's the risk when you start doing that type of stuff, when you have that type of massive cash dissemination, this sort of helicopter cash approach, without controls on where that money is going, who's administering it. And honestly, it's a reason why you don't break economies in the first place, is to prevent the necessity of doing these things. But that was 2 years ago. I mean, you're right. You point out that all that sort of ended 2 years ago throughout much of the country, because by the fall and winter of 2020, a lot of states stopped imposing mask mandates. I mean, I live in Texas now, and Texas hasn't had mask mandates, I think, since the fall of 2020. And I mean, we could argue over the wisdom of that. Maybe you might want to have a point about that. But the point now is that the mask mandates are so out of favor that they're disappearing everywhere, even though officially the White House is still saying that they probably still need to be in place in some aspects. But right, I mean, at this point now, we're no longer fixing problems that we're no longer breaking things that require fixes. So why are we still spending money on this on an emergency basis, especially?
Look, the answer to that last question is that unfortunately the current administration is of the ideological outlook that every problem, real or imagined, has to be fixed with a government program. And the more money you spend, the better. And, you know, so for example, if you look at their test to treat initiative, which is part of the Biden administration's COVID package, you will find that it's incredibly poorly thought out. They're saying that they're going to be opening these locations in March. And I would point out that they announced it in March. So they're suggesting they're going to have this all open in March. Yet the chief players involved here, the CVSs, the Walmarts, the Walgreens of the world, don't have any of the details. They don't know what locations they're looking at. They don't have details about what's required and what they're going to be doing there. All we know is the sort of promise that the president made in his State of the Union address is that we're going to have these settings where you can go get tested. If you test positive, you'll get free oral antiviral pills on the spot. So it'd be nice to know who's going to be doing that. And it'd be particularly nice to know because the details here are extremely important.
Right.
You know, you're dealing with two drugs, one by Pfizer, one by Merck, which are authorized by the FDA with the very specific limitations. Not everyone can prescribe them. They're only supposed to be used in people who have mild to moderate symptoms and are at severe risk of progressing, or at high risk, of progressing to severe COVID disease. So right away, you've limited that. Most people do not fall into those categories. And we have no idea from the government or any of the people who are supposed to run this, who's supposed to staff these centers. It's only supposed to be prescribed by physicians, advanced practice nurses, and physicians' assistants. Pharmacists cannot prescribe these medications. That's what the FDA says. So unless you're going to know that you can staff these centers with those three categories, it's not going to work. Pharmacists can't do it. In fact, the pharmacy associations have complained about that it's too narrow a situation. And if you prescribe carelessly, if you do just what the president seemed to be saying, that everyone who tests positive gets the pills, you're going to be over-treating because not everyone really should be treated. And you're going to be subjecting those people to medications that have some really severe drug interactions and potentially serious adverse effects. So I'll take, for example, the Pfizer drug, which is the far more effective drug. That drug is not supposed to be used in people who have severe kidney disease or liver disease. It's got dozens of interactions with commonly used medications. This should not be prescribed willy-nilly. You really have to have a physician there or someone who's informed who's going to do that prescribing. So, again, I'm focusing there on a specific aspect of the program, but it really requires that before you rush off to spend more money, because that's your ideological bent, that you seriously consider what you're doing and whether it's necessary or not.
Well, and Dr. Zinberg, you're the director of public health and wellness at Paragon Health Institute. So, I mean, this is certainly right in your wheelhouse, right? I mean, let me frame this issue in a different context. I mean, COVID-19 is going to be with us now, probably permanently. It's not going to be SARS. It's not going to disappear because you've contained it, and the people who have it, who were exposed to it, have a lasting immunity against it. We still don't know about lasting immunity. I think there's been some hopeful signs about lasting immunity from vaccinations and natural exposure. But this is a virus that's going to keep kind of cycling around and probably end up being something like the flu, where you're going to have a different variant. There may be a different shot that you need to take at some point. Although, again, I think some of the information about T and memory B cells has actually been pretty encouraging that may not even be necessary. But the point is that we're going to be needing to live with this. The emergency is over. So we shouldn't really be funding this as an emergency. Shouldn't this be more about planning within the budgets of HHS, CDC, NIAID as part of is the same way they do for the flu or any other common infectious disease, even the ones that are common and serious?
Well, look, we hope this is going to become what's called endemic, meaning it's always there. It's just kind of there as a steady state. You talked about the flu, which is the influenza virus. That's something that's always circulating. It comes back year after year with slight variations, which is why we have a new vaccine every year. That might be the situation with COVID. We're going to have to see. At the moment, we know that the vaccines have remained effective with all the different variants in terms of keeping you from going on to severe disease. They're quite effective in keeping you from getting hospitalized or from dying. So again, as I said before, I would hope everyone would get vaccinated. However, there's always the possibility, just as there is with the flu, that even though it's endemic, you may have not just a small shift in the virus from year to year, you may have a large shift. And that's in effect what happened here. You had a new virus that we didn't have immunity to, and that can happen even with the flu. So I previously worked at the Council of Economic Advisors, where I was a senior economist and general counsel. And we did a study back in the fall of 2019 dealing with preparations for a pandemic influenza and what could we do to spur vaccine innovation. And we came to the conclusion you needed to have public-private partnerships to innovate, to adopt new vaccine discovery and manufacturing techniques. And those, by the way, were precisely what was done in Operation Warp Speed.
I was just about to say that's Operation Warp Speed, right?
Right. No, exactly. In other words, providing the money to speed the development of the vaccines, purchasing in advance so that even though before the vaccines were authorized, so that you would spur the companies to take the risk of continuing to pump some of their own money into and continue the research. Those were important things to get going. Those are important things going into the future. But I think you're right. I think that has to be part of a larger effort, a larger reassessment, not just throw another $22 billion or another $30 billion or whatever happens to be the amount du jour at a problem that isn't emergent at the moment. This isn't to say that it should be wrapped up, forgotten, and ignored. It obviously is a problem that we have to consider both for COVID and for influenza and for lots of other infectious diseases. So yes, these are problems that have to be addressed, but be addressed in a sort of calm, considered way, not sort of ad hoc, throw money at it.
Indeed. And I would just, I know we're close to being out of time here, but I do want to just address one other point on that, which is that you're hearing already people saying, well, we need to spend a lot of money on the next pandemic. And you're sort of addressing that, but I want to address that a little bit more directly. The way you do that isn't to spend money up front on something that you don't know. I mean, you talked about this in terms of Operation Warp Speed. You actually have to have the virus or the infecting agent in order to develop these types of vaccines, in order to develop the response, because each one's going to be different. They're going to affect different populations. It's going to be a different set of circumstances. The point, though, is that we need to be able to make those decisions and have the mechanisms in place. And so my question for you is this, Dr. Zinberg, you're an expert at this. Have we learned those lessons over the last 2 years? Are we actually going forward with reforms that will expedite that process and make us more efficient? Or are we simply just throwing emergency money at the same old structures that don't really work for that type of response?
Well, I think what we've learned in the last 2 years is that we have to change the structure a bit. In other words, I think, unfortunately, public confidence in the public health apparatus has been undermined. It all seemed a bit ad hoc. There were times when data collection was bad. There were other times when data was collected but not shared with the public. And there were other times when the public was frankly misled. So I think the public wasn't trusted. And now the public doesn't trust the various public health authorities because of that. So I think there's a lot of repair that has to take place going forward. And on a more sort of fundamental institutional level, we have to lay the groundwork for the type of research and development and spurring of innovation that we saw on a very accelerated basis during Operation Warp Speed. We have to lay the basis for that going forward.
Yep. I agree. And Dr. Joel Zinberg, thank you so much for being with us. Competitive Enterprise Institute can be found at cei.org. Where can people find out about Paragon Health Institute?
Well, you can Google Paragon Health. I don't remember the exact website name off the top of my head, but Google Paragon Health Institute and it will pop right up. And you can
ParagonInstitute.org. ParagonInstitute.org. I looked it up while you were talking, so I just want to make sure it gets in there. ParagonInstitute.org. That's where you can go. I'm sorry. Continue on about what Paragon Institute actually does, sir.
No, it's a new think tank that's devoted to analyzing public health issues and science in general. So we have 4 initiatives focusing on provision of private health and private health insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, and then my initiative, which is dealing with public health and American wellness. So it's brand new, and we've already produced a product dealing with how the states can contribute and how we shouldn't wait for just the federal government. It's called Don't Wait for Washington.
Well, that's terrific. And again, you can go to paragoninstitute.org for more on that. And Dr. Joel Zinberg, thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope we can get you back to talk more about some of the initiatives later at Paragon Health.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, we'll have more from the Ed Morrissey Show. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Joining me for a nice change of pace to get off of this existential doom wheel that we're all on these days. Christian Toto of HollywoodandToto.com, my friend and yours, comes back to visit us, talking about the Oscars, talking about all the news that's around that, talking maybe a little bit about wokeness and comedy, because he's got a great post up. Just went up today on Wednesday, I believe, about wokeness and comedy. Did it kill comedy? Yes, it did. But we're going to talk about that too. Christian, great to have you back on.
I feel like I'm the official palate cleanser for your show, and I appreciate that.
Hey, I mean, honestly, when I'm filling in for Drew on Fridays, I always like to finish with, just something that is fun. So I either invite you or Stephen Gradanis to come on to talk about movies. And both of you guys are great. Different perspectives, but you bring the same joie de vivre, right, to this. So yeah, it's great to have you on. Really appreciate you doing this. Let's start off with the wokeness and the comedy thing, because I read that today and I thought I really got to talk to Christian about this, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Oscars thing because that's coming up. But wokeness and comedy, you talk about this, about how you had these, even recently, or at least fairly recently, you had movies like Knocked Up, Wedding Crashers, The Hangover, There's Something About Mary, that were just raunchy fun, right? R-rated comedies that were just raunchy fun. And Joe Rogan talks about, you mentioned that Joe Rogan talks about this on his podcast. You and I have talked about wokeness and comedy in the past. So tell us a little bit about what Joe Rogan had to say, and then let's talk a little bit about where comedy's gone.
Yeah, well, Joe Rogan had a comedian on, Tom Papa. He's a stand-up comic, and they were talking. I didn't hear the whole episode, but they ventured into movies and comedy movies, and more specifically. And Joe Rogan said that wokeness killed the big screen comedy. Now, what he means by that is those R-rated style comedies, which you just mentioned, The Hangovers and all those kind of movies. They were outrageous. They were over the top. They were crazy. They weren't for kids, for sure. They were for adults. But they were very, very funny, honestly. And it's the kind of movie you see and the whole audience is laughing. And then you go home, you go, I got to tell my friends. You want to kind of spread the word because you had a great time. You want them to have a great time too. And I've been thinking about this for a while now, is when was the last time there was a movie like that? And I can't remember in recent years. I mean, obviously we can go back to the early 2010s and all, but recently, what's new? And now we had Free Guy last year, which I thought was very funny, very charming, but it was like PG-13.
Right.
And then Hulu created Vacation Friends with John Cena, who's a pretty funny guy, and the cast is pretty solid. I didn't get many laughs out of it. It's not the kind of movie I'd ever watch again. Where did they go? And I remember when Todd Phillips, the director, spoke about this. Now, he's the one who directed Old School and Road Trip and the Hangover trilogy. And he recently did Joker, which is not a comedy. And he said, well, I looked at the landscape, I look what's going on in the culture, and you really can't do comedies like the ones I used to do not so long ago, because this whole restrictive nature of you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't poke fun at this, you can't do, you can't say these kind of things. It's like taking all my tools away. And he was attacked in the press for saying that, but he's right. And that's what Joe Rogan said, is where have all the comedies gone? It's a good point. It's an important point. I know it's just comedy, but it does speak to the culture at large. But Joe did drill down on something which I think is really interesting, and I want to mention here. What he mentioned is you can do blood and violence and gore in movies today. It's been the way it's been for a while. That's
Sure.
fine. You like it, you don't know. He says, for some reason, when you do comedy, the people who are critical of this comedy movement, they seem to think that laughing is an endorsement of sorts. That if you have an on-screen character like John Belushi in Animal House, this is actually a real example, where he's looking in at the sorority girls and he sees them undressed.
Right.
And he's, and we laugh at that because it's wrong. And it's kind of goofy and it's funny and it's something that we would never do. But we can laugh at a stranger doing it on the screen. And what Joe Rogan said, and which I think is true, is like there's something about sort of this comedy police movement where that laughter is an endorsement, like saying, oh, we agree with that. Well, we don't. But we can often laugh at things that are wrong. I mean, I don't want my wife to get a pie in the face, but if she get a pie in the face, some people might find that funny. And if you trip and fall and you end up in the pool, that may be humorous. I mean, there's lots of sort of darkness in comedy and lots of sort of anger in comedy and sort of inappropriate material that makes us laugh. It's instinctual. We don't want to laugh at someone tripping, but sometimes it does seem kind of funny. And a lot of movies bank on that. And I think what Joe Rogan was talking about was that,
Yeah, no, I think that's, I mean, you mentioned Animal House, and there was a lot of things in Animal House that you wouldn't necessarily endorse. I mean,
right.
The most sympathetic character in Animal House ends up sleeping with a 13-year-old girl. I mean, that's not exactly the type of thing that you think is going to be sort of an endorsement. The whole thing, like you mentioned, with the peeping Tom thing that John Belushi did, nobody thinks that that's acceptable.
Yeah,
it's just funny, right? And
it's wrong. It's funny because it's wrong.
Right. I mean, there was this whole thing. If you go back to the making of Animal House, there's been a couple of documentaries about this. The studio executives were going to refuse to release it with the scene in the honky tonk, right? With when they go into the primarily black honky tonk and see Otis Day and the Knights, and they walk in and there's the one line where the guy's saying, "We want to dance with your dates" thing, and he actually I think John Landis actually had to ask Richard Pryor to take a look at it and sort of give it an endorsement. And and I know that scene would never, ever pass muster now. We talk about Blazing Saddles, but I mean, I don't think you could make Animal House either again, at least not in the form it's in right now. You could do Old School, which was actually a pretty funny movie. Actually, I was surprised at how much I liked Old School. I was actually a little surprised by how much I liked Old School. But it's raunchy. You got a guy sleeping with a high schooler, right? As one of the setups. We're not endorsing that, but it's and actually it's sort of a plot point because it sort of messes up his attempts to have an actual relationship with somebody else. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any guts in comedy. And your post asks, Christian, is there even an attempt at politically correct comedy movie? Or at least Joe Rogan asked this, right? I'll offer one, which I saw the other day. Too.
Let's see what you say.
Okay. I just happened to see this on cable because I I'll be honest with you. I needed something on while I was hanging a bunch of shutters back up, all plantation shutters up in my house because I'd taken them all down to get the windows replaced. So I just needed something on to keep me occupied, and I watched Blockers. It's a terrible movie. It just doesn't work at all. And it should. I mean, the concept's hilarious, but it just doesn't work.
No, I've got one that actually did work, and I was shocked that it was as funny as it was. And it's super woke. And it came out a couple of years ago and died a quick and horrible death at the box office. It was called Booksmart. And it's about these two high schoolers.
Oh,
They've
yeah.
been very, very studious all their scholastic life. They're going off to college. And they realize, oh, my God, some of their friends goofed off the whole time. And they're okay. And they want to kind of live it up a little bit. And it's, it's progressive, it's woke, it's all in your face. And yet it managed to be often very funny. And that's a rare example of what we're talking about where it works. I saw Block. I think I liked Blockers a little more than you, but I didn't like it a lot. But I don't disagree. But I think with Booksmart, they really kind of threaded that needle. But why do we need to even thread that needle?
Yeah.
Why can't we be outrageous and bawdy? And like you said, it's not a confirmation. I don't have daughters, but if I had a daughter and she was of college age, I don't want John Belushi-esque figures looking in on her. But if I'm in a movie theater and John Belushi's on the screen and he's wacky and hilarious and he's doing something inappropriate, I might find that funny.
Right.
And it's really weird. And just to throw a little wrinkle, I think I mentioned in the story today, is that the woke left has no problem with hitmen movies. We've got dozens of them. This whole John Wick is basically hitmen killing hitmen. And I don't care about that. It just is what it is. You can like it or dislike it. But why aren't they upset about that? These people taking the law into their own hands, slaughtering so many folks. And in other movies, they're often the good guys. John Wick is sort of, I guess, morally ambiguous at this point, although I think they killed his dog, so we're on his side. But there are movies where it's pretty clear that we're meant to root for the hitman. And often maybe they have a change of heart. They want to retire. They don't like this business. Again, moral shades of gray. But where's the outrage? Why are you outraged about John Belushi in a comedy from 45 years ago, but there's nothing about killers? It's what drives me nuts, and which it shows just so that the baked-in dishonesty of this whole woke movement.
Well, I agree. Baked-in dishonesty in spades, absolutely, about this stuff. And my thing with Blockers was that it was a great concept, right? And it had a good cast. I mean, I actually think John Cena is hilarious on screen. I loved him in Trainwreck.
Good.
I loved him in Trainwreck. He was great in Trainwreck, and I'm not a Amy Schumer fan at all, but that was actually a funny movie, and in part because it was at least somewhat politically incorrect. Right? The whole sequence in the movie theater with with John Cena referencing Grindr, and oh my gosh, it was absolutely hilarious. Blockers didn't work for me because the attempts at woke really were just so painfully obvious.
Yeah.
And Gary Cole was funny. That whole sequence with Gary Cole and his wife, the two sequences with Gary Cole and his wife were hilarious. But the movie itself just didn't work at all. It just broke down.
I want to throw another one into the mix. There was a movie a few years ago called Neighbors with Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne, who's very funny, by the way.
Yes.
She's underrated as a comic actress. And it was good. It was funny. It was successful. Of course, they rushed out a sequel. Fine. It's what they do. And it was called Sorority Rising was the subtitle. And I didn't like it. It bombed at theaters. It wasn't very funny. It wasn't it didn't have the spark of the first one. And you could say maybe it was a one and done concept where it was good the first time. You couldn't replicate it. Maybe not, because I read the behind the scenes story of that movie, and they actually hired two female screenwriters to kind of oversee the project and make sure that it was empowering. Now, empowering in and of itself is nothing wrong with that. But if I'm seeing a raunchy R-rated comedy with Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne, I think empowerment is not on my top to-do list of how to make this a great movie. And it wasn't. And it wasn't a good movie. And it wasn't funny. And it might have been empowering to the 10th degree, but who cares, because no one saw it because it was bad.
Right.
And that was an early example, because that's maybe, I'm going to guess 2016 or maybe 2017.
Something like that,
yeah. Yeah. But it's more intense now. And I guess now they just don't even try these kind of movies.
No, and I think you run into. I think that this is just, again, you run into this whole thing that everything has to be didactic. You can make. I mean, the didactic works in dramas, quite often. It doesn't really work in comedies because comedies are, by their nature, have to be irreverent and somewhat iconoclastic in order to work. I mean, the whole thing in Animal House, for instance, is going after, Dean Wormer, the establishment. Blazing Saddles works because it goes after, Governor LePetomane and Hedley Lamar, Harvey Korman's Hedley Lamar. There's something about Mary kind of even works along those lines too. It goes against this sort of establishment idea of romance movies, right? And
what about the slobs versus the snobs? I think that was the pitch for Caddyshack, wasn't it?
The slobs versus the snobs, yeah. Again, there's always an element of tearing something down, of skewering somebody's, somebody's ox has to get gored, and it has to be an ox that everybody recognizes, so it has to be somewhat archetypal, and that's what makes comedy work. If you are punching down, right? And I think this is what it gets down to in comedy anyway, because I think you can make this work in dramas depending on how it's structured. But in comedy, if you're punching down at the audience for their beliefs, right? I mean, the whole thing is that you want the audience on your side. We all want to be in Delta. We don't want to be in what was the other fraternity in Animal House?
I forget.
We don't want to be in Niedermeyer's fraternity. We want to be in Otter's fraternity. We want to hang out with Otter. Right. So if the whole thing is this sort of didactic, it's lecturing the audience and it's telling them that they're not cool. It's not funny. It doesn't work.
I want to mention one other thing about some of these comedies, not all. I think American Pie is a good example. I just rewatched Shallow Hal. I think it's a great example here. Now, Shallow Hal is a movie that it's a lot of fat jokes, and we don't really do that anymore. And there's a part of me that gets that, and it's sort of low-hanging fruit in a way.
It is, yeah.
But the point of that movie, and you can say, well, they're making fun of fat people, and at times they are, but they're also ripping away our ego and sort of saying, well, it's really about true love. It's about decency. It's about looking past appearances. I mean, that is the ultimate message of the film. A lot of these R-rated movies have a real sweet emotional center. You could call it conservative. You can call it moralistic. I don't know, whatever you're going to phrase it. But I also think it's interesting that a lot of the best of these movies does do that. 40-Year-Old Virgin, at the end of the day, our hero decides to wait until marriage before he has sex. The whole movie is about how making fun of him for being a virgin and how he wants to lose his virginity. And then when he meets a great girl, instead of hopping in bed right away, he waits till their wedding night. I mean, what could be more, old-fashioned than that? And I think we miss that too when we kind of basically erase these kind of movies, because very often they have that. I don't think Animal House had that. I think that was irreverent, and Caddyshack too. But a lot of the newer ones, I think that sort of that interesting moral compass amidst all the R-rated chaos and the nudity and the banter and the bawdiness is actually a sweet film. And you can't even get there now because you didn't go in the other, because the first half of the journey is not allowed.
Yeah, and I think Apatow actually does pretty good at that type of comedy, even when it doesn't work. I mean, I watched This Is 40, and it was really a struggle for me to sit through that thing because I didn't think it worked. But it wasn't because it was overly woke. I just thought that it was just overly not funny,
Ouch.
maybe I just related to it a little bit too much, right? But I think normally he's pretty good at that type of thing. And but yeah, I don't see an Apatow, R-rated Apatow film coming out. At least I'm not aware of one that really fills that bill.
He has a new movie coming soon, but it's more like a satirical spoof of Hollywood, maybe a touch about COVID. It doesn't feel like a Judd Apatow movie. It might be called The Bubble, coming on Netflix very soon. But I look at the comedy landscape. I'm thinking, who are the big stars? Like Adam Sandler, who just works for Netflix now, but also Will Ferrell and Seth Rogen and Amy Schumer. A lot of these players who are talented. that used to make these big kind of crazy bawdy comedies, they just don't do it anymore. And when they do stuff for like streaming platforms, they're not very successful. Melissa McCarthy's career is just withered. And she's a very funny lady, but
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's woke is complaining her or just bad writing. I think she's really been stuck with some bad projects. But, you know, I kind of like a culture where we can go to the movies every couple of months and see a really rip-roaring comedy. And even if it isn't hilarious, maybe there's one or two scenes that are just like, that was funny. But we don't even get that.
No. And again, I think it's because they're too into the didactic. All right.
Yeah.
Let's change course here and talk about the Oscars. There's already controversy with the Oscars. The biggest controversy with the Oscars is who really gives a shit these days? I'm sorry.
Whoa.
The PG-13 version. I mean, first off, and you know me, I have made no bones of the fact that I refuse to watch these things anymore. It's just a bunch of idiots lecturing people about stuff they don't know about, and completely unentertaining, right? As a result, I mean, it's sort of the same piece that we were just talking about. Is that there?
It is. You're right.
Yeah. The controversy this year. My apologies, folks. The controversy this year, though, is that they've trimmed off some of the awards in order to make the televised ceremony last somewhat shorter than a back-to-back showing of Gone with the Wind and Dr. Zhivago. Two films, by the way, that neither one of which really captured my attention. And a lot of people are kind of ticked off about this. And I kind of understand why. I mean, these are important categories. These are filmmaking categories. But I think people have to remember that there's already a number of important technical categories that aren't part of the big gala event.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. They've got to shorten the show. I guarantee even with this tweak, it will not be shorter, or it won't be dramatically shorter. So I think they're going to fail anyway. They're trying to do two things. They're trying to appease the artistic community, which I get, but they're also realizing this is a showcase for Hollywood. It's on ABC. They need a certain amount of ratings for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of different, I guess, measures that the academy body partakes in each year. And I think that this one annual event will help fuel them economically. So there's that. But at the end of the day, I think the artists don't realize that 99% of America, they just don't care who the best editing award goes to. And that sounds mean, and it doesn't dismiss the skills of those particular artists. It's just reality. And so what I'm thinking is, how the Oscars, they want to get better ratings and they want to shrink the show, but they don't really want to address the true problems with the show. The arrogance, the lectures, the elitism, the lack of a great host. They push all those realities aside and say, I know, we'll fix it by trimming a few categories down by a little bit. So by doing that, they really don't impact the show that much. They don't really bring anyone new to the fold, and they anger their own community. But that's just how bubbled in their thinking they are. They picked Amy Schumer, who's doing a media tour right now, where all she's talking about is her feminism and all her views. And that's exactly the persona that has chased away half the country when it comes to the Oscars.
Yeah.
And yet you just chose her to be one of three hosts. Are you kidding me? Are you crazy? Can you please raise your hand and say, we need some help from an outsider? Because I'd love to come in and just give them tips. Because, at the end of the day, you and I do love movies. And at the end of the day, you and I used to watch this show and probably enjoy this show. They need us back, not us, the two of us. They need people like us back. And they have no legitimate ability or interest in getting us back. It's the shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. It's almost more comical than that.
So here's, I think, what the issue is. Fundamentally, conceptually, what the issue is that the Oscars used to be oriented to the audience. We're going to bring out a lot of really great stars. We're going to have them dress up in the absolute finest that the fashion industry can design. We're going to do the red carpet thing. You're going to see all of your favorite stars. And then we're going to do this really gala awards event, and you're going to be in the balcony, basically, for this thing. you got a ticket, right?
Yeah.
And the stars are going to go out there and they're going to be gracious and they're going to thank you for your participation, and you're going to feel like you had a chance to hang out with them for a few minutes. And everybody who loves movies, loves those types of opportunities. And about 40 years ago, and I would actually maybe peg it about the same time that maybe 50 years ago when Sacheen Littlefeather accepted George C. Scott's Oscar. And certainly by the time that Vanessa Redgrave got up and did her declaratio for the Palestinian cause, and Patty Chayefsky got up and chewed her out for it on stage not long afterwards. It became all about them. This was their event, and it was all about them, and they were focused on themselves, and you could watch from the outside, but it's not about you. It's about us.
I agree with that. I think it's a great point. But I think the examples you mentioned were still one-offs at that time. They were the exception, not the rule. But now almost every other speech is some sort of cause celeb. Almost every other joke is not just a joke, but it's got a purpose behind it. So I think that was where it began. But I still think the show itself was mostly as you described and mostly an outreach. But I think the sort of the seeds that were planted in those early days have bloomed right now. And now it is all about them. So they want it both ways. They want it to be all about them, but then they want all of us to watch.
Right.
You can't really do it both ways.
No, you can't do it both ways. And that's the reason why, the real solutions to this are to increase the increase the live performances and to decrease the live speeches.
Yeah.
Right. Do more of the songs, or at least do the songs, right? And maybe have some more of the clips from the movies themselves, and limit speeches to 30 seconds or less. Anything else you want to say, go out to the press room afterwards and say whatever you want to say. I mean, and some of that stuff is actually better than it is on stage. I remember Spike Lee's response to the Green Book winning over his movie, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like, something about a black man being in a car. I can't remember. It was a Driving Miss Daisy reference. I can't remember what it was. He'd had a few drinks before he got it to say it. I thought it was absolutely hilarious. I didn't agree with it, but I thought it was absolutely hilarious. Very entertaining, and he did it he was very entertaining when he was doing it. So it's not that those types of things don't get noticed, right? But just graciously thank everybody, briefly, and get off the stage, and let's get on to the next thing so we can see some more clips from those movies, so we can all enjoy the experience of movies rather than the experience of political lectures, which we get every damn day. Otherwise, there's nothing special about the way that they're doing the Oscars. That's really what the issue is.
A couple of years ago, I was watching, I don't even know if it was the Oscars. It was an award-like show. And I think it was Andy Samberg and maybe Sandra Oh. And they were giving their monologue. And I thought, it's not really funny. Like, it wasn't even in the
I remember that.
Of funny.
I remember that.
And I thought, okay, now here's a show that takes months to do. And I'm sure they've got many writers. And I'm sure they didn't start writing the jokes yesterday. So there's no excuse not to have a few killer jokes in there. Even if I don't love them, at least I can recognize that was pretty clever. There wasn't any of that. And I thought, well, why? What's going on? How could this show, which takes months to make, which has all these people, it has all the money, why aren't they writing a funny monologue? And then I thought, oh yeah, they don't want to write a funny monologue. They want to give some virtue signaling about representation, about female empowerment, about diversity. That is their prime directive with these monologues. Now, I know you're not going to watch the Oscars later this month, but you'll probably catch some clips.
Yeah.
And I guarantee when you watch these hostess, the three hostess, I guess they do 3 monologues. I have no idea what's going to happen. But when they're telling jokes, I guarantee that the focus is going to be on diversity and empowerment and whatever issue du jour is on the plate, as opposed to let's just tell a really funny joke. Because that would be funny, and that would bring people like you and I back into the fold. Because you know what? I don't like some of these celebrities, but that monologue every year, it's so funny. It's like the best jokes. It's 5 minutes. It just laughter, laughter, laughter. It's not what they want to do now. They have a different agenda, so it's not funny.
It's clapter. They're looking for clapter.
At best, clapter. Sometimes it's not even related to this comedy. And that's why Ricky Gervais a couple of years ago was so crazy, because he really wanted to make us laugh. No, he went the extra mile and was poking fun at Hollywood. And that was cathartic, at least for me. I'm sure it was for you.
Yeah.
But I also think that if you hired Ricky Gervais and you said, okay, do your thing, don't make fun of us, but do your thing, I think he would just write some really funny jokes and just tee him off. And the show would get off with a bang. But I just don't think that's their prime directive now. I really don't. Maybe the new show will surprise me. Maybe, Amy Schumer is funny, can be funny. But I just read an interview just seconds before we started talking about her prep for this. And she tried a few jokes out on, I guess, the Oscar producers. And they were sitting there stone-faced, in part because she's telling dirty jokes. And like, I don't mind dirty jokes, and she can be funny with her dirty jokes. But this is the Oscars. This is not the time for dirty jokes. How about funny? Right. Can you bring us some funny? And she seemed just clueless about that. And then, she's talking about feminism and how she's, all the, I think we don't want.
Oh, no, the Oscar producers do want that. That's the problem.
You're right.
Yeah.
Because that's why they hired her. You don't hire an Amy Schumer and think, well, she's not going to be feminist. She's not going to be political. She's not going to be raunchy, because that's who she is.
Well, Wanda Sykes. Sykes is one of the. It's Amy Schumer, Wanda Sykes, and I can't remember who the third woman is.
Regina Hall, who's not even a stand-up. She's just an actress. I mean, she's pretty funny in the Scary Movie movies. I mean, I'm not insulting her, but there's not. If you polled America and said, who's Regina Hall, I would bet less than 1% would know who she is. And again, she's a working actress. There's nothing wrong with her. But why would you pick her to host movie's biggest night? What's the upside?
I'm not sure, other than it probably fits a diversity slot. I mean,
she's black and she's female.
She's black and she's female, and Wanda Sykes is also black and female, and overtly lesbian.
Yeah.
And she's a comedian. And Amy Schumer is Amy Schumer. She's Chuck Schumer's niece, and and again. Nothing. I actually think Regina Hall might have been the best selection out of the three, because if you want to actually do, I mean, here's a thought. If you actually want to do an elegant, open-minded Oscars, I'd say put Tom Hanks up there next to Regina Hall, and have them just graciously host the show and talk about the movies and discuss the experiences of the various different movies, and be a traditional MC pair. Put Tom Hanks up there with Regina Hall, and I guarantee you do better at attracting an audience than you're going to get with Amy Schumer and Wanda Sykes.
You're right. And by the way, Regina Hall is a funny comic actress.
She is.
And I don't know of any baggage she brings, politically speaking, left or right, which I think is important at this point. But, obviously Schumer and Sykes, bring Samsonites full of, I mean,
and I like I said, I liked Amy Schumer in Trainwreck. I thought actually that was sort of a daring movie for her. She was not a very sympathetic character throughout most of that, and it really does talk about being a train wreck and what a dead end that was. And Brie Larson was in that movie. This is before Captain America really vaulted her up. And she was terrific in that movie. Hey, put Brie Larson up there with her. I mean, they actually had pretty good chemistry as sisters in that movie. Put Brie Larson up there with Amy Schumer. Maybe you get some sort of magic out of that. But I'm just really not all that interested in seeing how that turns out.
I know you're not going to watch, but if you were to watch, and if you and I were in a room together watching it, I guarantee from our seats, we could watch the show as it unveils live and think, okay, that could be cut, that could be cut, that could be cut, that could be shorter. I don't think any show of this kind needs to be 3 hours long. I really don't. I mean, here's the nominees, a couple of things, here's a speech, do it a bunch of times. That is not 3 hours worth of material, but there's always this bloat and this majesty and this sort of, this pomposity to it.
Right.
You could reimagine the Oscars. They don't want to.
No, they don't. And they, again, because they're doing it for themselves, they're getting what they want. They're not going to get ratings, but they're getting what they want out of it. Speaking of ratings, though, you got to go over to hollywoodandtoto.com and visit Christian's pad over there, and follow him on Twitter at Hollywood and Toto. Make sure that you stay on top of all of that. And even if he's talking about the Oscars, got to stay on top of everything he's talking about over there. Got some great reviews over there as well. And just really quickly, before I let you go, and I know we're running over here just a little bit, but did you get a chance to see Inventing Anna on Netflix?
Not yet, no. I'm a little behind. I was traveling over the weekend, so I have not been watching as thoroughly as I should. Is it worth checking out?
It is very much worth checking out. I mean, it's not perfect, but it is very good. Actually tracks fairly decently with the facts in the case.
Okay, good.
It's told in Rashomon style. So, you're getting perspectives of different characters. So there's some obvious ways in which the interpretations differ between the characters. And so there's a lot that's left on the viewers to determine what they think is, what they think the reality is. But it is very good. It's very interesting. Okay. I found it very compelling. It was one of those things I can't wait to get to final episode, and then I'm really sorry it's over because it was an enjoyable ride. So so I'd recommend that if you get a chance. Okay. I'm gonna eventually write a review it, I guess, at some point when things settle down. Who knows? All right, Christian Toto, man, thanks so much. Always great talking with you, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show.